One thing that's extremely common in audio is that we love to label things, describing them so that we can fit them into our own neat little category. We do it with people, genres, and of course we would do this with audio terms. If there isn't a word for it, we'll just make one and keep saying it until it sticks. Spank, lush. Like, what is that, right? And when did we even start talking like that? The lack of technical terms for what we're trying to describe is the main reason, but that doesn't mean that we have a universal understanding of what these slang terms we've created mean. Well, by the end of this video, you'll have an understanding for these terms that hopefully puts your mind at ease. So what's happening, fam? Miami here with JST, and I've come to a big realization. The biggest thing to understand about these terms is that they all work together to create a neutral sound. That means these terms only make sense when referring to the absence of each other. For example, if we take two terms, dark and bright, we wouldn't usually describe these on the same source, right? The more bright the source is, the less dark it becomes, and vice versa. So a ton of these terms refer to the frequency spectrum, but not all. So we'll be going over both. Also, many of these terms mean the exact same thing, and people just use different terms for them. So we'll be going over that also. If you need a deeper look into the EQ frequency spectrum, make sure to download our EQ cheat sheet in the description below to put you ahead of the curve. The first one, Boomy, also known as bassy or rumbly. These all basically mean the same thing. You know, transition game still crazy and all that. 100 hertz and below is where it lives. Your low end and subs are out of control. And I actually need all of my subs to be out of control, so make sure you hit that sub button, notification bell, and like button because my transition game is even crazier than I thought. The easiest way to tighten up these areas is to cut everything under 20 hertz on your kick and sub and not boost the kick and bass in the same place. Also, using a multi-band compressor on the low end of your bass will tighten it up as you go through changing and playing different notes. Warm, also known as muddy and boxy, but we'll say warm versus muddy and boxy for now. The reality is that these represent the same EQ area, 150 to 350 hertz, but depending on the frequency spectrum of the rest of the source, you'll call it one over the other. If it's rather neutral across the EQ spectrum with a pleasing bump in this area, it's what we consider to be warm. If there's an overabundance in this area, we call it muddy or boxy. But it's actually a little bit more complex than that because when we typically refer to something as boxy, we're talking about transient rich information like drum shells, right? But when we refer to sustaining sources, we typically refer to them as muddy, like guitars. Let's take the term boxy for a second. Have you ever put your head inside of a box and just talked inside of it? It's a weird thing, but we've all done that, right? That's pretty much the sound that we're talking about here. Now let's get into warm. We refer to old analog gear as warm simply because of what the circuits and tubes were doing to this frequency area. But at the same time, this was happening 60 years ago in music when it was nowhere near as fast-paced as it is now. As a result, instruments tend to get tons of buildup in this area, attributing to the names that we have given them. A good rule to live by: if anyone ever refers to your audio as warm, just leave it alone. You have succeeded and done your job. If they say it's muddy or boxy, well, it's time to grab an EQ and cut this area out of existence. Honky and hollow. This area is aptly named. Sitting in the 400 to 600 hertz range, honkiness makes a ton of sense because a car horn has a note that sits at 500 hertz. It's a sound that we're extremely familiar with, so when we hear that frequency area being pushed, that's what it reminds us of. Too much of this frequency and it's honky. Not enough of it and it becomes hollow. When you think of hollow, imagine the sound of something being hit that has nothing inside of it. On to our next topic, nasally, also called bitey and tinny. These can all be lumped together and start around 1K area and goes up to 2. The nasally term is obviously used to refer to vocals, and there is a scientific reason behind this term. They conducted a test of the nasal airflow and came to the conclusion that the expiratory sound of the left and right nostrils is indeed between 1.1 and 1.3K on the average person. Tinny is usually meant to describe things besides the human voice, unless it's for some kind of radio effect. Tinny and nasally are not meant to be positive sounding terms in my experience. Usually when someone's referring to this, they want a nice cut in this area. Another thing that lives in this area is guitars and bass. And for guitars, we like to use the term bite here. But bite, unlike the other terms, is typically used in a positive way. A nice little boost in this area can really give guitar a unique identity. Coming in next, presence. When you want to bring something to the forefront, whether it be vocals, guitars, or even a kick drum, presence can be referred to in a positive or negative way, coming in around 3 to 5K. For example, if something is too present and you want to push it into the background, it's a quick area that you can check and dip for that exact reason. When it comes to bringing something to the front, you can easily boost this area to help you put it on top of the mix.
Breaking free from a memory, the last one I have of how things used to be. Yeah. Breaking free from a memory, the last one I have of how things used to be. Yeah. Breaking free from a memory, the last one I have of how things used to be. Yeah. Breaking free from a memory, the last one I have of how things used to be.
Brightness, trebly, sibilant, sheen, all these things. This is the area where treble technically even begins. The reality is treble would have to define the point where we reach brightness all the way up until we can't hear anymore. So 6K and up. But that's not really the way that we speak about it since we've created so many terminologies for it. When we talk about treble, brightness, sibilance, and sheen, they fall into the 6K to 10K range. It's what we reach for when we feel like something is too dark or isn't standing out properly. It lives in the 6K to 10K range and when used on instruments brings out a nice top end, usually referred to as trebly or bright when it comes to guitars and synths, and referred to as sibilant or sheen when it comes to vocals. A great place for boosting in this area is 8K for vocals and guitars, but this is also the area in which sibilance will mostly affect your vocal performances. Sibilance won't usually go above 7K for men and 9K for women, but you'd be surprised where you might find these frequencies sometimes.
'Cause every time I turn around, 'cause every time I turn around, 'cause every time I turn around, I see you in the underground, and I'm hoping that one day you see you're the only one that's left for me.
One of my favorites of them all, sparkle, also known as air and sweetness. This area is around 12K and up. It's where we boost to breathe life into the performance. As with most higher frequencies, we usually talk about these terms in a positive way. Adding air or sparkle to your vocal, for example, is a great way to push it through the mix. Or if your mix is too dull, it's a nice way to make it a bit more neutral. An EQ shelf is the proper way to add this to your mix, and if you're adding it to a bus or single track, I recommend doing a high cut around 20K since we can't really hear above that area anyways. It's essentially just added noise at that point. But when you hear about how a master added sweetness to the track, this is typically the area that they're reaching for with a very nice EQ. Another couple I want to run through really quickly that don't really have much to do with EQ, glassy. I hear this term all the time. It refers to a guitar tone that's on the brighter side, that's right between clean and distortion, right on the edge of breakup and mostly used in genres that focus on mid-gain guitar tones. Snappy, refers to drums that are compressed pretty hard, made famous by the 1176 Fet comp because it adds a lot of grit in the upper mids. It's harmonically pleasing, but this can be actually done with a lot of compressors. That's just one that refers to that snappiness. And lush. Lush is any sound that is very ear-pleasing and relaxing overall. Think luxurious, like if you were at a spa or something like that. That's what that term means. So now that we've done this, let's go over all of these one more time. Boomy, bassy, rumbly, 100 hertz and below. Warm, muddy or boxy, 150 to 350 hertz. Honky, hollow, 400 to 600 hertz. Nasally, also called bitey and tinny, 1K to 2K. Presence, 3 to 5K. Brightness, trebly, sibilant, sheen, 6K to 10K. Sparkle, also known as air and sweetness, 12K. Understanding these terms and having them under your belt will make it way easier when trying to decipher what your peers and clients are talking about. The terminology and slang that we've come up with has made it challenging. But if there is one language that is always and will always be universal, it's music. And I'll stand by that till my dying day. And are there any words you feel like I left out? Did anything catch you off guard in this video? Leave it in the comments below and I will chat with you wonderful people like I always do. If you're an engineer on the come up, give this video a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe, you only have to do it one time. And tap that bell for notifications so when a video drops, you know the location. Until next time, I am out of here. Mic drop. Except as engineers we know, I'd never really drop this thing because that'd get really expensive. Even though I almost just did. And it is still a piece of sure. Later.